Hello, sorry this video is so much later than they normally are. It's been very hectic and I've been up and down, back and forth, and I will be for the next week or so. I'd made this video with the intention of uploading it while I was away, or rather I'd uploaded it and was going to release it while I was away, but there was a technical issue that I hadn't noticed, so I didn't do that, and I'm just back now, so I thought I'd try and fix the issue and upload it. The next video might take slightly longer than usual to get done and uploaded as well, but hopefully after that things will return to semi-normal. It's raining outside and I'm afraid this will be a really slide heavy one because it's a kind of beginner's lesson. I'm making this video because in a lot of videos I use the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA, which is this way of transcribing how things are pronounced. And I think this is good for illustrating pronunciation in a precise way, but it's also difficult to read and use if you've not set out to learn it. So this video will hopefully be a very detailed guide to IPA, or a reasonably detailed guide to IPA and how it works, starting from a beginner's level. And in order to explain certain aspects of it, I'll also have to explain certain linguistic concepts, so you might end up learning something extra about those. The point of the IPA is to show how words are pronounced in a way that's unambiguous to anyone who can read the IPA. It's not designed to be easy to read, it's designed to be precise. That is important if you want to be able to compare pronunciation exactly, and track things like sound changes and the small differences between accents and individual people's pronunciation. The English alphabet isn't equipped to do this kind of thing because there are only 26 letters, which is nowhere near enough to cover the range of sounds humans can produce. People will sometimes try to illustrate English pronunciation using systems they've come up with themselves, and dictionaries sometimes have their own ways of showing pronunciation, but these things aren't very good at showing the differences between dialects, and they completely collapse if you try to use them to show the differences between separate languages. For example, how would you show the pronunciation of the German word Eichhörnchen using these systems? You might be able to produce something that sounds vaguely right that an English speaker could read out, but it wouldn't be anywhere near precise enough to be able to usefully compare English and German pronunciation. How a person read this transcription would also depend on their accent. That applies between dialects of English as well. An example I thought of while I was writing this was in The Simpsons, the bully character's catchphrase is pronounced something like ha ha, but in the comics I read as a child it was spelt like this, and that confused small me because in my dialect that looks like it should say haw haw by analogy with words like raw that are spelt the same way. But for most Americans, raw is pronounced more like rah. So from an American English speaker's perspective, that spelling is easily interpreted, but from a British English speaker's perspective it's not. If I told you there was an Old English word pronounced gar, a British English speaker might transcribe this as G-A-R, but an American English speaker might write it as G-A-W. But the British English speaker would probably read this as gaw, and the American English speaker would probably read this as gar. And neither of those actually matches the correct pronunciation of gar. So hopefully you can see why these systems can cause confusion. You can see how the English alphabet might not be very good for precise transcriptions of pronunciation. Another issue is that ordinary everyday English doesn't have much terminology for describing pronunciation. There are a very small number of terms that are precise enough to be kind of useful, so if people say rolled R, they generally either mean ra or ra. But other terms aren't very well defined and different speakers might interpret them differently. If an English speaker is writing something and they mention the soft th sound, this probably means either th or the, because these are the sounds normally represented by th in English spelling, but it's completely unclear what the word soft means. I would probably interpret this to mean the, because that's more sonorous like a vowel, and that's kind of how I interpret the word soft there. But I've seen people use soft th to refer to th as well, so these words aren't very good because they're not very well defined, and different people will understand them in different ways. So the IPA exists so that people can transcribe pronunciation in a way that's really precise and not as open to interpretation. One of the first hurdles in learning IPA and learning about phonology in general is learning to disconnect pronunciation from spelling. We might be taught in school that certain letters make certain sounds, but in reality our vocal tracts make sounds and letters are just our way of representing those sounds on the page. It's helpful to free ourselves from the idea that sounds somehow arise from letters. The way we speak, in many ways, is more complicated than the way we write. I'll start by going through the basic vowel sounds and explaining something about the way vowels work. A vowel is a sound made while the tongue is kind of hovering inside the mouth, not touching any of the surfaces around the edges like the teeth or the hard palate or anything like that. This strangely shaped chart on the screen represents the vowel space, the area inside the mouth where the tongue can go to produce vowels. This angled line at the front is the front of the space near the teeth. The vertical line is the back of the space near the throat. The top and bottom of the chart are high and low in the mouth. Vowels can also have various degrees of lip rounding when you pronounce them. The lips can be unrounded or rounded, and intuitively, vowels where the lips are unrounded are called unrounded vowels, and vowels where the lips are rounded are called rounded vowels. You'll also hear vowels described as high, low, front, back, and central, depending on where the tongue is in the vowel space when you pronounce them. To give an example, a high, front, unrounded vowel is E, which is represented using this IPA character. You might be able to feel that when you pronounce it, the tongue is extended high and forward in the mouth, and your lips aren't rounded. Now try keeping your tongue in exactly the same place as if you were saying E, but round your lips. E, E, E. This sound doesn't exist in most dialects of English, but it does exist in a lot of other languages, and it's represented with the IPA character that looks like letter Y. Just like colours, vowels exist on a spectrum. In theory, there are thousands of possible vowels you could make just by moving your tongue a tiny bit further up or a tiny bit further back, and rounding your lips a tiny bit more or a tiny bit less. But the IPA has around 28 symbols for vowels, and those symbols can be made more specific if necessary, which I'll explain about later on. So if I hear or, I'm going to transcribe that using this symbol. If I hear I'm going to transcribe that with this symbol, and so on. Again, vowels exist on a spectrum, so sometimes a vowel that people actually use in the real world might fall halfway between two IPA characters. In that situation, if you wanted to be really precise, you might use diacritics, which are little bits that you add onto the symbols to make them more specific. So you have these IPA characters which represent and air, but what if you hear a vowel like that falls about here on the chart? Well, you'd pick whichever vowel symbol it sounded closest to, let's say the lower one, and then you'd put a marker like this to show that the value here is higher in the mouth than the prototypical quality of this IPA character. So the vowel is still best represented by this IPA character, but this diacritic means the tongue is raised towards the position, and that's why the vowel sounds kind of halfway between and air. Or if you felt this vowel quality was more towards the position, you could do the opposite. Write but add a diacritic to show that it's lower than this prototypical quality, and you'll notice the diacritic for lower is just an upside down version of the diacritic for higher. And there are other diacritics as well, for if you want to show that a vowel is more central, more fronted, more backed, and so on. If you put this diacritic above a vowel, it means it's nasalized, so while you're pronouncing the vowel, you direct some of the air out of your nose instead of your mouth. So a would become a, would become and so on. This isn't normally that relevant to English, but some languages do nasalise vowels as an important feature. And the last important symbol for vowels is the length marker, which is this thing that looks a bit like a colon but with little arrows instead of dots. This tells you that a vowel is held for longer, literally just held for more milliseconds. So you could contrast this with this The vowel length thing has important implications in some languages, but we'll talk more about them later. One other point about the vowels is that they can be monophthongs or diphthongs. A monophthong is a vowel that holds its quality the whole time you're pronouncing it. Any one of these vowels on its own is a monophthong. A, U. A diphthong is a vowel that glides from one quality to another while you're pronouncing it. So an example of that might be a vowel that starts off at and ends up at E. A. And that diphthong exists in my dialect of English in words like same, day, face. A Scottish speaker might pronounce these words with a monophthong like this. Same, day, face. You can have raising diphthongs which go from lower to higher, like a, ow, lowering diphthongs that go from higher to lower, like ua, ia, fronting diphthongs which go from further forward to further back, oe, backing diphthongs which go the other way round, eo, and centering diphthongs which go from the periphery of the vowel space into the centre, like ear. I'm going to produce a few monophthongs and a few diphthongs. If you want, you can close your eyes or look away from the screen and try and work out whether each one is a monophthong or a diphthong, then pause it and look back at the screen to check. E, o, ah, ow, ew, ew, or, The consonants are a bit more complicated because they involve the tongue touching or nearly touching the edges of the vocal tract. I won't go through all the consonants, but they work in the same way, one symbol per consonant. But you can use the same diacritics to push them further forward in the direction of the teeth and lips, or further back in the direction of the throat. So for example, the sound th is articulated with the tongue at or between the teeth, but if you add this diacritic to it, you show that it's pronounced with the tongue slightly further back at the alveolar ridge, which is the ridge you can feel just above the gum line. Consonants are described based on their place of articulation and their manner of articulation. The place of articulation is where in the mouth your tongue goes when you pronounce it. The manner of articulation is how your vocal tract produces the sound. I won't go through all the terminology because it's not really important here, but I'll give a few examples. Now when I pronounce these consonants, I'm going to say a vowel after them. Bear in mind that's not part of the consonant, it's just so you can hear it more easily, because b is easier to hear than b. The sound th is a voiced interdental fricative. It's voiced because your vocal folds are vibrating when you pronounce it, and you can feel that as a buzzing if you touch your Adam's apple or where it would be. The. It's interdental because the tip of the tongue is between the two rows of teeth, and it's a fricative because the air produces friction over a period of time as it comes out of the mouth. The sound g is a voiceless velar plosive. It's voiceless because at the moment the sound is produced, your vocal folds aren't vibrating yet, although they start vibrating straight afterwards as I say the vowel. On its own it would be k. It's velar because it's pronounced with the tongue drawn back to the soft palate. And it's a plosive because you store up air and then release it in a burst. G, g. You might notice that this g sound isn't exactly the same as the English k in a word like cat, except in a few dialects. This is because of something called aspiration, which we'll talk about later. Now to get into something a bit more fun, we're going to transcribe someone speaking and analyse their phonology. If I want to really narrowly transcribe someone speaking, I use a program called Prat. It's a free program and you can put a recording into it and it will come up with a spectrograph of the recording, which is a visualization of the acoustic properties of it. For the moment, you don't need to pay too much attention to that. The speaker is my friend Connor, who's a writer, and I'll probably link to some of his stuff in the description if anyone wants to look at it. In terms of his speech, the first thing we're going to do is analyse his phonology, the system of sounds that he uses to speak. And this is a complicated thing that's woven into IPA transcription, so I'll try and explain this in a few ways. Firstly, it's important to know the difference between phones and phonemes. The difference is very important if you're studying sound systems in languages. It's easy to use the word phoneme when you mean phone, and that's a mistake I made a lot when I started. A phone is a sound in the real world. It has specific acoustic properties, and it's made in a specific way by the tongue and the vocal tract. T, g, a are all phones. Regardless of what language you speak, a is a. You might not have that exact sound in your language or dialect, but it has specific acoustic properties that you can measure, and it's made, as I say, in a specific way. I don't want to overcomplicate this. Basically, a phone is just a sound that you make with your vocal tract. The idea of a phoneme is more complicated. A phoneme isn't a real-world sound, it's the idea of a sound in the mind of a speaker. It's the smallest unit of speech as a speaker of a particular language analyses it. Phonemes are language-specific and they're defined by their contrast with other phonemes. I'll use a good example highlighted by Jeff Lindsay in a video I'll link in the description, which I'd recommend watching, and that is the example of ejective consonants in English. If I want to pronounce this word in my dialect of English, I can say click, or I can say click. Click, 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 click. The difference is in the consonant at the end. It can either be a voiceless velar plosive, ka, ka, or a voiceless velar ejective, ka, ka. These are acoustically different sounds, but as English speakers we think of them as basically the same sound. This is because they're different phones, but they're surface level realizations of the same phoneme. In our heads, they both represent this phoneme. That's not the case in all languages. Some languages, like Hausa, make a phonemic distinction between these two sounds. In Hausa, ga and ka are as different from each other as k and p are in English. If you say the wrong one, you've said the wrong word. This shows that while we all have the same range of sounds available to us, barring certain medical conditions, different languages divide those sounds up differently. But how do you tell which phones represent which phonemes in a given language? A good way you can do this is by setting up minimal pairs and running them past a native speaker. A minimal pair is a pair of meaningfully different words that only have one phoneme's difference between them, like cat and cut in most dialects of English. Everyone would agree that these are different words, and the only difference between them is that one has a and one has a. In this recording, I'm going to set up a few minimal pairs with Connor, my friend, and we're going to discuss them afterwards. I'm afraid this recording may include swearing. So, say that word.
Cot.
Then that word.
Court.
And are they pronounced the same as each other?
Oh no.
No.
You fucking moron. How dare you ask me such a stupid question?
Oh no, I was going to go for some...
I'm going to kill Simon Roper now.
Say this word.
Meat.
This word.
Meat.
Are they pronounced the same?
Yes.
Okay. This word. Sorry.
Pin.
And the other word.
Pen.
Are they pronounced the same?
No.
This word.
Chicken.
This word.
Thicken.
Do they rhyme?
Oh, yes.
Okay. This word.
Poor.
This word.
Poor.
Are they pronounced the same?
No, but I would say I might pronounce them interchangeably.
Okay. What, like if you were talking casually?
Yes, just talking casually, I definitely probably swap them out.
Okay, this is just for admin purposes. Can you say these words?
Start, nurse, force, square, near.
And then these words?
Cat,
If you can read.
ket, kit, cut, cot.
And just to clarify, those are all pronounced differently from each other?
Yes, certainly.
And these two?
Cut, foot.
And they don't rhyme?
No.
Oh, I've done that. Oh, I did that twice. These two?
Horse, horse.
And they're pronounced the same?
Yes.
Okay. And now if you would read this sentence.
I bid on the man with 3 beards.
And then say this word again.
Bid.
And this word.
Beards.
Okay. And then this one.
Ed's shirt was old, so I aired it out.
This word.
Ed's.
This word.
Aired.
Thank you, friend. I will clarify after the recording what everything is.
Of course.
And then this sentence, if that's okay.
I cut the wood to make the cart.
Okay. And this word.
Cut.
This word.
Cart.
And then these 4 words.
Pill, lisp, lilt, liberal.
And then these 4 words.
Car, rat, course, baron. Could you say that word, please?
Rat.
Rat.
And then this sentence.
I do work until the rent is due.
Okay. And this word.
Do.
And this word.
Due.
And they're pronounced differently.
Certainly.
Okay.
Finger, singer, long, longer.
Okay. And finally.
boy, by, bay, bee, bow, boo, bow.
Yeah, I realised those are spelt identically, so I was like, I was going to do some gestures. Thank you, friend. Then we can discuss the rest. Some of the questions here were just to get an idea of the phonemic vowel contrast in Connor's speech. All seem to be meaningfully separate vowels in Connor's speech. We could transcribe these vowels phonetically as he says them in these example words, like this. This is a transcription of the phones, an acoustic and mechanical transcription of the actual sounds that are coming out of his mouth, and that means that we put them in square brackets like this. This is a phonetic transcription describing his speech on a mechanical level. But now we know Connor has these 6 vowels as different phonemes, we can also do phonemic transcriptions of these words. Not only are they acoustically different, but Connor uses these vowels to make meaningful contrasts between words. In other words, they represent different phonemes in his mind, 6 different vowel phonemes. A phonemic transcription goes in forward slashes like this, whereas a phonetic transcription has to accurately describe the sounds used. In a phonemic transcription, in principle, it doesn't matter what symbols you use, as long as you draw the right distinctions between phonemes. You could transcribe this word like this, as long as you then transcribe this word like this. In other words, as long as you consistently represent each phoneme in a specific, predetermined way, the transcription is accurate. But most people will use appropriate IPA symbols to make the transcription a bit easier to read. In English, this phoneme normally surfaces as a voiceless velar consonant of some kind, and so in a phonemic transcription people normally use the K symbol, which would represent a voiceless velar plosive phonetically. That doesn't mean this phoneme is always realised as a voiceless velar plosive. As I said, sometimes it's an ejective, ka, but this character is a good description of how it's realised in speech most of the time. And also on a practical level, most European and American keyboards have got K on them, so it's easy to type. For ease of reading, I'm going to transcribe Connor's vowels phonemically the same way as I do phonetically. I tested a couple of consonant things that differ from dialect to dialect within English as well. One of those was how this L phoneme is realised.
Pill, lisp, lilt, liberal.
In his speech, like in most English dialects, it's realised as a voiced lateral approximant, I think an alveolar one, which means the tip of the tongue is very close to the alveolar ridge above the gum line. But if it comes after a vowel and before a consonant or a pause in speech, the body of the tongue is raised towards the soft palate, which doesn't happen so much when it's pronounced before a vowel. Before a vowel, it's L. After a vowel, it's more velarized, like L. L, 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 L. This might be tricky to hear in the recording, especially if you speak a dialect that does the same thing, which I do. But it's a good example of a phoneme being realised in different ways depending on its position in a word. Consistently, it's L before vowels and L after a vowel and before a consonant or a pause. Phonemes often have these kinds of rules that apply in certain environments. L and L are different phones, but we call them allophones of the same phoneme. So an allophone is a phone, a real-world sound, that represents a particular phoneme. L and L both represent this phoneme, and there's this rule governing which one occurs where. There aren't always rules, so sometimes different allophones occur in free variation, which means they're used interchangeably with each other, regardless of the surrounding sounds, but often rules do apply. Sometimes it's difficult to know how to analyse something phonemically, so to give an example using the R phoneme, Connor pronounces this as an alveolar approximant. R, R. But there are certain situations where the spelling of words suggests there should be a R, but you don't hear that sound when Connor speaks.
Car, course, car, course.
If you examine this more closely, you realise that he only ever produces the R sound when there's a vowel straight afterwards.
Rat, baron. Rat, baron.
That's another good example of pronunciation not always corresponding to spelling. Where in spelling we have a vowel and then a letter R, in Connor's pronunciation we just find a vowel.
Start, nurse, force, square, near. Pour, start, nurse, for, square, near. Pour.
Most of these are monophthongs.
Start, For,
but one of them is a diphthong.
yeah. For.
We'll ignore the diphthong for now and focus on these monophthongs. These behave differently from our other 6 vowels that we've already established. They're held for longer. Normally you'd need to get more data to properly draw this trend out, but this is well recorded across a few dialects, so this recording will do for this video. If you were doing a phonetic transcription, you might choose to add the length marker to these vowels to show that they're held for longer, but would it be appropriate to put a length marker in a phonemic transcription? Many would say that you only need to put a length marker in a phonemic transcription if the length is contrastive, so in other words, if the long vowel has a short equivalent with the same quality. The litmus test for this would be to find minimal pairs. Are there any words that are only different because one has and one has or because one has o and one has all? I would argue that there is a long-short pair with and and you can see that in the near minimal pair, eds and ed.
Eds, ed.
When Connor really enunciates, there's possibly a slight flick of a centralised off-glide at the end of this vowel. But when he uses these words in a sentence, the vowel length is the main thing that distinguishes them.
Eds, ed.
For all these other vowels, I'd argue that they don't form long-short pairs with anything. Cut and cart almost match in Connor's accent, but they have slightly different qualities.
Cut, cart. Cut, cart, cart.
I think the tongue's higher in the mouth for the cut vowel than it is for the cart vowel. Because it forms a meaningful contrast, I'd say the length of was phonemic. But what about these other vowels? They're all pronounced about the same length as and they all exist where there was historically a r in the word. Clearly these vowels have a lot in common and they must form some kind of category with each other. Maybe it would help us to look at these vowels in normal speech. I had a conversation with Connor about his accent, mainly to help give you a sense of his background, but it also gives us a secondary benefit. Because he's speaking quickly and not paying too much attention to enunciating, we might be able to learn more about his vowel pattern based on the way he speaks here. So, you're from South Africa originally?
Yes, I was born in Cape Town and lived there until I was around 8, and then moved to Johannesburg.
Okay. And then you came to Britain when you were sort of
15? Yeah, I think it would be 15.
I think that's more or less when we met, maybe a bit later.
I think it was about 6 months after I came across the pond that we met.
Because when you came, you sounded... I don't remember you sounding that different to how you do now.
No, my accent's been incredibly constant, I feel, since I was very, very young.
And you said you sounded more British than other people around you.
Yes, ridiculously so. To the point where people thought I was British. Nobody thought I was a local, by the way I talked.
And your mum, you said, if you don't mind talking about that.
Yeah, of course.
From Zimbabwe.
She's from Zimbabwe, and so it sounds a lot more, high register British.
Right.
Kind of merged with sub-Saharan.
Oh, sorry, my phone's buzzing. Hang on, I'll just stop it doing that because it'll come up on the recording. Carry on, sorry.
That's all good. Yes, there's a typical sub-Saharan white person accent.
Yeah. That
seems to abound. The kind of colonial.
Yeah, I was going to say I not knowing much about Southern African accents, I wouldn't be able to tell your mum wasn't from South Africa, because to me she sounds quite South African.
They're incredibly similar to the point where it doesn't make that much difference.
Yeah, there must be like little differences that I don't pick up on. But yeah, do you think you can tell the difference?
Yes, definitely. It's definitely a lot more musical, her accent.
Right. And your brother speaks, I would say, similarly to you.
To a degree, he's definitely gotten closer. He lost his accent pretty fast because he was 11 when we came over.
Okay. But he sounded more South African.
Oh, definitely. You watch videos when he was a kid, he sounds completely South African.
Okay.
He sounds kind of like my dad. My dad definitely sounds strongly Cape Town South African, because there's obviously a difference between Cape Town and Johannesburg.
Yeah.
In different places. You could even, like a Durban, a KwaZulu-Natal white person, which sound very, very different from me. Possibly because they're high.
Right.
But,
okay.
Or a surfer. Like, yeah, Durban accents like this, and Cape Town to an extent, that's the surfer California accent of South Africa.
That's fun. Interesting to know.
Probably because it borrows quite a bit from American surfing culture.
Does it?
Yes. Absolutely. I think it's similar to any seaside place you go to.
That's interesting. It's interesting that it's like region, because I've heard people say, I've heard people say that Australian accents are more class divided than they are regionally divided. I don't know how true that is because I've not really looked into it.
Oh, I can believe
it's
that.
interesting that South African accents are like regionally in the same ways.
I think it's class and region.
Okay.
I'd say, because you tend to have, there tends to be more working class, like Afrikaans people.
Right.
Just well, not working class is the wrong way to put it. Because Afrikaans kind of society evolved more around frontier and farmstead things.
Right.
Where you'd find people who sounded kind of like me, more in established cities. I think a good comparison would be East Coast versus West Coast American.
Okay. Okay.
That's a very good way of putting it. And yeah, I think my accents just come about because when I was younger, I made a conscious effort to pattern myself. Because I was watching a lot of retro like BBC comedy. So like
Yeah, that
Father Ted, Red Dwarf. That was, it was ridiculous how much of that I watched.
Because we were saying before, I think South African and British, or at least Southeastern British English vowel systems are very similar in terms of distinctions. It's just the actual phonetic realization. So it would be very easy to put British English or similar to British English realizations onto the underlying phonology. You made a nice analogy, the car analogy.
Yes, the chassis is South African, but the panel work is British. Or to give a very good example of the incompatibilities between certain accents, my friend, she's Polish.
Right.
She speaks English now more than she does Polish. But I was on video call to her to catch up a few months ago, and I was with my girlfriend, who's Irish, but can speak with a perfect sort of Hampshire accent.
Yeah.
Mostly doesn't attempt to, pass as English.
Yeah.
Yes. So they tried to have a conversation, and my Polish friend, who speaks English flawlessly, could not understand my girlfriend.
Here we have yet another thing that drags these vowels together. When these vowels are immediately followed by another vowel at the start of a word, a r suddenly appears in between them, which causes the spoken words to resemble the written words a bit more.
Lived there until her accent, more round.
From the evidence we have here, which is still fairly limited, we can say that this group of vowels are pronounced for longer, and if they occur at the end of a word where the next word starts with a vowel, a r sound can appear after them. With this group of 6 vowels that we analysed earlier, the r thing doesn't happen, and in fact these 6 vowels don't seem to occur at the ends of words at all. Although we'd need a bigger data set to confirm that, but I know Connor and I know that that's true. So here we have 2 distinct groups of monophthongal vowels. I think we can safely represent these just using the IPA characters we've decided on. They're pronounced short, so they definitely don't take a length marker, and they don't have any of this complicated r stuff going on, so we don't need to worry about that. This group shows more complication. As long as you record the rules right, you could analyse this in a few ways. You could say that these are all long vowels and mark them with length markers, and give a rule that says in Connor's dialect long vowels always have a r appear after them in certain positions. But alternatively you could drop the length marker and argue that these are actually sequences of phonemes consisting of a vowel and then a r. And you could argue that this r phoneme behaves really weirdly, and that in certain environments it doesn't surface at all, and in certain environments it surfaces as a r sound, and it always makes the previous vowel long. And then you could add a dialect-wide rule that says the r phoneme never occurs after any of these 6 vowels. What about the diphthongs? Our 2 r-related diphthongs seem to behave similarly to this group of vowels in that a r often appears after them in certain environments. So let's compare the other diphthongs which I've craftily elicited from Connor earlier.
Oi, I, a, o, u, ow.
All of these diphthongs are raising diphthongs. The tongue gets higher in the mouth as you're pronouncing them. Ow, oi, and so on. You might be able to feel your tongue gliding up as you replicate them. But our two diphthongs here are centering diphthongs. The tongue glides away from the periphery of the mouth and into the centre. Oor, ear. On that basis, I'd argue that these diphthongs just cluster with the rest of these vowels. There's also this loose monophthong. This has a similar length to these vowels, but it doesn't have that weird behaviour. There are no words that end with ear in certain situations, as far as we've seen here. So, given that, and given that this can occur at the ends of words, which these vowels can't, I would lump this in with the diphthongs and say maybe it was underlyingly a diphthong, but it doesn't really matter too much. Another thing is this central vowel which seems to only occur in unstressed syllables. Water, about. This vowel system is actually laid out very similarly to the one Jeff Lindsay describes for Southern Standard British English in his book English After RP, which I'd recommend to anyone interested in modern British English. If you do precise phonetic transcriptions of bits of Connor speaking quickly, you'll find the phonetic realizations are a lot more all over the place than the underlying phonemes they represent.
I think it was about 6 months after I came across the pond.
The underlying sequences of phonemes are the important part, and the stream of phones is just the way these phonemes are transferred from the speaker to the listener. Hopefully this has gone some way towards explaining the basics of IPA and phones and phonemes. I'll probably make another long video like this at some point in the future, maybe analysing different people's accents and addressing some questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment them and I'll address them in that video, because there are bound to be things I've forgotten here. As a final couple of notes, I said I'd explain aspiration. An aspirated consonant has a short, voiceless burst of air straight afterwards. And in most dialects of English, the voiceless plosives p, t, k are aspirated whenever they occur at the start of a word, and in many dialects they're aspirated in other positions as well. For fun, earlier in the video I tested whether Connor had some of the common vowel mergers that occur in some English dialects but not others. To clarify, in many North American dialects the vowels in cot and court are pronounced identically. The vowels in meat and meat used to be different, but now only a very small number of speakers in Ireland and possibly Northern England make that distinction. Many dialects, including mine, merge the vowels in paw and paw, so the two vowels sound identical, and many, possibly even most non-British dialects merge the unstressed vowels in chicken and thicken, which is one giveaway that Connor isn't from southeastern England, as some other features of his accent might suggest. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.